Welcome to the interview. You are the leader of the AnyScale Learning For All group at CSAIL, and you work on a bunch of different applications from healthcare to cybersecurity to online education. So could you talk a little bit about this work? And also specifically, could you talk about if you found that current frameworks for machine learning are ready to be deployed at scale, or if you've had to develop new algorithms and new architectures for these works?
Well, hi everyone. I am leader of a research group called ALFA, AnyScale Learning For All. And the idea is that we develop new algorithms and we try and apply them to areas of importance that are challenging and that really are at the intersection of there being data, lots of compute, and this emerging, burgeoning technology of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So, we've evolved from a group where initially we were one of the first people to start thinking about scaling algorithms to the cloud and using data that was at large volumes, in the time of big data. But where we sit right now is we're looking at the world through different lenses with this whole idea that the world is faster and faster paced. And as we all look out and we observe it, what has changed really is our ability with our system, our computer systems, to observe it through all sorts of data. So now the real task is to make sense of the data so that you can understand the world better, right? And so, that basic set of questions sort of guides a lot of our work. And it allows us to have research thrusts in a variety of directions, right? You can talk about collecting signals from the body. Right now we're looking at fMRI, and all of those are observations of human thinking or human physiology, and you want to make sense of those. You want to model them so that you can understand them and potentially forecast or predict in the medical domain. But we also look at cybersecurity. We're really interested in this phenomena of, malware and cyber attacks. And that's another sort of phenomena. It's a dynamics, but it's happening and you can observe it through all these different actions of adversaries, whether they be the attackers or the defenders, and this arms race that you're watching unfold in cyberspace.
Yeah, I was reading about your work on finding tax fraud and and I thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah, that was a really interesting project because I've been talking a lot about our, one of our technical focus is evolutionary algorithms. And these are algorithms that are loosely modeled on this notion that you can recreate Darwinian evolution algorithmically. And then what you get as a result is when your algorithm executes, you get populations of solutions adapting over time through feedback towards becoming better and better suited to the particular problem domain you're trying to get these solutions for. And I was talking to someone and they were like, well, come on, we have this problem in taxation where, these attacks come at they attack the Internal Revenue Code and they cost a lot of money. But the problem is that every time the Internal Revenue Code is updated to try and get rid of them, another loophole ends up emerging, and these attackers are able to take advantage of it. And so there's this evolving arms race going on. And so is there any way you could use these algorithms to look at this situation going on? And so that's what really kicked off a lot of our current research in the group, where we're really interested in what we call adversarial dynamics, or what I call also artificial adversarial intelligence. So I'm interested in this idea that there's adversaries and they're always engaging with one another and they have conflicting objectives. But because they're intelligent, they're able to sort of observe what happens during their engagements and take the sort of performance and the outcomes of those engagements and go back, retreat, and use some sort of learning to adapt their approach to engaging the next time. And what you see is this sort of evolving arms race coming from learning and adaptation when adversaries sort of set up against each other.
That's so cool. when you interact with specialists from all these different areas, so tech specialists, healthcare specialists, I'm sure you have a certain barrier in communicating your work because these people are maybe not as familiar with the technical aspects of the project. So how do you overcome these difficulties in communication?
Well, I think you're spot on. There's always going to be communication ambiguity at these intersections where there's a domain with a need, and then there's a technology that needs to be advanced to actually suit and be appropriate to the domain. And I would actually say that while they have a hard time understanding me, I think sometimes I have a much harder time understanding them, right? I mean, I think that our approach has always been, how do we talk in the other person's language? And it's just amazing how many times you find that there's words that are loaded in different domains. And so you're using this word completely with a particular set of meaning. I mean, you're talking to someone and they know that word and it has a completely different context and meaning for them. And so our approach to it has always been to explain ourselves better and try and figure out if we should do our homework to learn more about the domain. So, that happens when we work with specialists in medicine. And it works. It happened a lot when we worked in the tax project, because believe me, we're not tax experts. We're slowly becoming better at understanding a lot more about cybersecurity, but that's because cybersecurity is a computer science problem, right? And we're computer scientists, so we're not just doing AI on any domain. We're doing AI on our own domain, studying our own domain. So that has been helpful. We haven't encountered as many barriers. But I also work where we look at the data from students who are learning online, and they're using they're taking something called a MOOC, a massive open online course, which runs on a specific cloud-based platform. And the technology enables us to actually record every click a student makes, and anonymously we can identify them. And we can actually start to go through that data and understand what their learning trajectories are, right? We can actually see how online, what resources they actually visit, how they do on questions we ask them, how they return back and forth when they have ambiguities with or challenges to questions. And so we have this wealth of information about how students are learning. And I, in my collaboration for the last 3 years, I've had this amazing colleague in Hong Kong, and she is at the Faculty of Education, and she does something called learning design. And it has taken me 3 years to really, really in-depth and richly understand what learning design is. But she's vastly interested in how these students learn and how you should teach them. But for her, the barrier is how to get at the data and make it help, and use it for feedback to improve what she's doing. And my barrier is that I can look at the data, but I don't actually understand the nuances of teaching and learning in the way that she does. I don't understand the systems. I don't understand, I can learn them, but that has been such an interesting relationship to start to find myself using her vocabulary. And it's a better way of working and thinking about doing the data science on this than, if I didn't have a collaborator in that domain.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up the online education, because I'd love to talk about it in light of the current pandemic. So given that a lot of courses went online this past spring and are going online this upcoming fall, do you anticipate new breakthroughs being made in the field or changing questions about what types of things you're interested in this online learning, climate?
Yeah, it's been a real roller coaster, right? I mean, when MOOCs emerged, they were very controversial. They're very disruptive because they took learning online and they made it for free, right? And there was this amazing open access to learning material. But the people who took these courses largely didn't do it for credit. They were doing it for self-learning. And so what happens with MOOCs is you have this really heterogeneous population of students. And that doesn't happen. If I go to MIT and I'm looking at out at a class of computer science juniors, I know what their background is and I know why they're there. And I know, in fact, at MIT, I probably know their academic courses that they've taken to bring them to that very moment. I mean, when you teach online with MOOCs in particular, up to now, all the research had made this assumption that your population, your student population was very, very different, very mixed. You could have like 9-year-olds and you could have engineers coming back. And I happen to look at a course on programming, and we really do sort of see very young students, and we see more mature students. We see people who already know the material, but they just want to prove to themselves they know it, right? We know students who are just trying to experiment to see if the course is interesting, and then they leave. So we spent a lot of time in learning science trying to understand that population, and I would believe that there's a very different population now that is encountering this online learning. So I think that has to be taken into account. It's really different if it's the only contact a child is getting in a 4th grade class, right? And so I can't imagine the challenges our teachers are facing right now, moving their curriculums that were in person with young children, with anywhere up to high school. I think that there's tremendous challenges in that environment, and I think that the problems are very different. So it's not clear to me that it's not that the old methods won't work. And I think there's a great opportunity now to take the kinds of analysis we've done and think about them in the new context. But one of my contexts was this idea that when you go online in a MOOC, you can decide what you look at next. So you basically choose your own navigational path through the resources and through the learning material. Well, that's not going to happen on these online courses. So that's going to really change, I think, some of the interpretations and some of the research questions for students learning online, but for in the COVID world. And the other thing is that what we really did learn with MOOCs is that you can't talk for too long. You really can't. People stop listening. We just don't get in. Nothing comes in. And so, like video watching, students really lag. Their attention really lags after 3 or 4 minutes. I mean, the best online courses are the ones that have little small segments of information before, and then they're mixed with active exercises or something. And so those are all really interesting factors that are going to have to be considered when we, in this COVID world where we're all going back to school, maybe online only.
Yeah, these are definitely really pressing questions. I want to shift gears a little bit because I noticed that you're also a member of the cognitive AI community of research. So how do you draw inspiration for your work from different fields like cognitive science?
So it's almost, let's see, that's a great question. Let me be really explicit about one example. So I have a student and he's very interested in how people understand programs, right? And so the reason he's interested in that also is because he wants to artificially create understanding of programs. Because if you can understand a program, then I'll have a machine learning tool or that can tell me that there's malicious code inside this piece of code, right? Or I can tell you if there's a bug, or I might be able to name functions better after you've gone, after your code's been gone through, I could read this code. So there's lots of really good reasons to try and understand code in a computer science, from a computer science perspective. But it really makes you step back to cognitive science and say, well, how do we understand code, right? And so if I give you a program, are you reading it just like a story? Is it a piece of text to you? Or does it actually require you to understand it through another set of neural mechanisms beyond that you use for natural language? So of late, with the student and colleagues in neuroscience, we've been taking that question on and asking whether for various program comprehension tasks, the centers, the regions of the brain being engaged are those that do natural language, or those that perhaps do more higher level or arithmetic or problem solving reasoning. So that's research underway. I can't give you any results yet. When we publish it, I'd be happy to share it with other people. But I think that is an example of how cognitive science and artificial intelligence and machine learning can intersect, right? There's representations of the brain of how we understand programs. And that's a neural representation. Here we are in deep learning, and we're building representations of text and representations of code. Those are neural representations, but of a different kind. And can we talk about how those representations, how do they function, and what do they have in common, and what do we have to make different because we're computing instead of doing it with biological neurons.
Yeah, and at the risk of making myself outdated by the time this video is released, I know that GPT-3 was just released, and it's pretty good at generating some code snippets. Yeah, my qualified endorsement there. And it's so interesting to see people hypothesize like how we could incorporate this into some of our workflows, or how it replaces some parts of our jobs as programmers.
Yeah, I mean, it's made on this terrifically big corpus of text, right? I mean, I think that's what's so remarkable about it. And I might have seen the same example as you, where there's a little bit of a code snippet, and you just by intent, it came up with some nice things. And I think there's some limitations, obviously, to that. So the field is not solved. There's a lot of research questions still left open. But I think a deeper question for me, with all the large language models that are being published, is how much are they memorizing and how much are they truly grasping meaning? If you can fool them, then you know that they're just elaborate, very, very high dimensional memory devices. And we think they're generalizing, but the question is, are they actually understanding? And that's still a very, very open question for things like GPT-3 and other sort of big language models. The big one in programming, I think, is code to SQL. It's one that's quite commonly used right now.
Yeah, the memorization question was definitely one I had myself when I looked at the generated comments, and I saw that someone must have written these at some point, and that it was maybe applying the same comments to certain lines of code.
Yeah, and I think it will get bigger and bigger. And I mean, I don't know, maybe if you memorize everything, you don't need to understand it. And that has been like a really big question that came out of deep learning that really sort of surprised me. And it's sort of related to your cognitive science question, which is, and it may have come up when you talked to Melanie Mitchell, right? It used to be that we thought to understand language, you need to get below the syntax and you have to get into the meaning. And yet when deep learning started to produce these amazing results, everything was very, very superficial, right? It was an awful lot of structure, but not much meaning. And yet we were advancing on understanding and text generation in ways that we hadn't in years. And I think that that's like a big open question is, how much do our models have to understand, and how much can they work at a superficial level and function for us? And do we care? I mean, what are the specific problems where one of those things is necessary or not?
Yeah, for sure. I want to hear a little bit more about your trajectory. So how did you get into the field, and how did you get where you are today?
Well, in high school, I was really strong in mathematics and in physics and chem. I'm not really a bio person. I'm not like a wetware person. And so computer science was really just emerging as a field when I was a young woman going off to university. And I found a computer science program being like, it had just started in the university I was headed to. And it seemed to need the mathematics and science I had. And I was like, okay, if this is something that has the right prerequisites for me, I'll try it. And I struggled with programming. The first thing you had to do in this program was take a programming course. And I was first year university student. I had not spent any time coding. I was much more athletic in high school. I had great grades, I had good grades, good enough grades and stuff, but I was not someone who spent a lot of time on extracurricular academics. And so, there I was outnumbered, though at that time it was great. There was probably 25% women in my class, but there was a lot of people who knew how to program and I didn't, and I struggled. And then one day there was this program assignment and I got it. I got it. I knew how to use functions. I knew how to use parameters. And all of a sudden my if then else's were right. And I knew when I needed a loop. And I mean, for some reason, it clicked and I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. And it was this idea that I could run this algorithm and I could give it different outputs, and I knew what it was going to do because I'd written the logic inside it. And it was just like, you just can't believe it. It was really like this moment. And I think I had the same idea when I realized that algorithms could plan, or that they could learn. There was this amazing feeling of excitement with, coming, with the power of this technology, and the fact that I could master it, or that I didn't know how to master it, but I could work on that. So I went from undergraduate, computer science, straight through to master's and a Ph.D. I'm Canadian. I came over to do a little bit of research during my Ph.D. in the US at the Santa Fe Institute. And then I started postdocing at MIT. And I've been at MIT ever since then. It really suits me. I like the environment there. But along the way, I've made a lot of decisions. I've sort of done that whole juggling of, what were my personal priorities, and then what were my career priorities. And, it was this constant balancing act that I still feel like I'm doing today, but it's a little easier once your kids grow up and go off to college.
Well, it's definitely reassuring to hear that there were moments when you struggled with learning.
Oh, man. I had 3 kids in 2 years, less than 2 years. I had twins, and then had a third. So I went from like famine, no babies at all, to lots of babies. And then there was this really long period where, I really didn't even know what I was going to do next. And I was really supported by a lot of people at work, sort of just saying to me, well, at this period, when you're knee deep in babies, you just have to sort of do the next thing that you can do, and keep it reasonable. And so, there was not, certainly during those periods of time, I doubted whether I would continue. I wondered whether I could take this great computer science skill set I had and technology know-how and go somewhere else and like apply it. That really appealed to me. And I think there was moments where I thought of stepping away from academics and doing that. But academics has its highs and lows, right? Its challenges and its benefits. And, the challenges, just you need to publish. You need to raise money. That's the reality of being a researcher, an academic researcher in the US right now. But it also affords you a lot of flexibility. And as long as you can sort of keep your, lean in just enough to make sure that you don't drown, you can keep afloat for a while before you have this momentum. So I certainly had lots of times where I thought, oh, this is way too hard. And then somehow I just eked my way through.
Yeah. Is there any advice that you would give to a student that's looking to learn machine learning?
To learn machine learning. So I think I can be really practical. I think that there's technical advice that you need. So you need a good mathematics background. Statistics and algebra are really important, and math is fun. Don't get sort of caught up in the social attitudes around mathematics. So if you're young, hang in there with the math. Find yourself some buddies. Find yourself a great mentor, someone who really appreciates your efforts and who can see your potential, and align yourself with them. So hang in there with the math and science that really, sometimes the STEM subjects are the ones that you abandon early in, and you just abandon them a little bit because of a little bit of social pressure and not enough support. And so I think that that's one piece of advice, sort of at the lower level. And then the other thing is not to worry too much too early about what you're going to do. Like, I shouldn't be giving advice to middle schoolers about how to be a computer scientist. The advice middle schoolers need is to love learning, right? And any kind of learning, and to not count any particular branch of learning out of that. And so for me, I think staying as broad as you can for as long as possible really makes you a well-rounded intellectual individual. And that's what you want to bring to anything you do in life, whether it be computer science or something else.
Sure. So say you're a grad student or an undergrad student that's looking to get into machine learning. Would you advise them to start with the theory side of things or the applied side of things? Because that's a question we often get.
Yes. See, you didn't say I had to pick one or the other. I think you need a little bit of both. I think balance is great. So we have a lot of undergraduates who come through our lab, and I really enjoy seeing them. And they come from all over in terms of whether they're in math or computer science or biology even. And often we get their hands dirty in a problem. So we find it much easier, to leave the classroom and take on a research project. It's really nice to have some data and then to, learn from a research group, the tools and the analyses methods. And so I think that, anytime you can get a research opportunity to help someone who's doing research, you'll get your hands, you'll get a little bit more practical experience. And then I think you also want the theoretical experience from your mathematics, from the coursework. So having a nice combination of that for getting into machine learning is really useful. And I think you then have to understand your strengths, whether your strengths are more on the theoretical side or on the practical side. There's some amazing data science and machine learning programs in the country and around the globe, and they're much more applied than maybe going to MIT and doing a foundations of machine learning type of program.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one last question, but feel free to add anything else that you think I might have missed. But I want to know what you're most excited about in your multiple fields, for the future and going forward. This can be your work, it can be crazy theoretical work that hasn't happened yet, it could be anything.
What am I most excited about?
Yes.
I am excited about the emerging intersection between social awareness and machine learning. So for me, that is really specific in that I have been learning everything I can about climate change. And I see climate change as both a scientific problem, but clearly as I sat through an entire technical course at MIT on climate change, what we also realized was it's not enough to just be a scientist and try and work with climate change. You also need social science, and you need to have the power of persuasion. And so one of the problems I'm really interested in now is, why is it that people don't believe in climate change? And why can they not accept it? And are there narratives that are being floated to make them doubt it? What are the substance of those narratives? How does technology factor in those people's beliefs? Because this is it's going on with COVID too. So what happens with COVID is you think it's just the epidemiology of a disease, right? But this is a disease which is all about infection, right? And so your social behavior, whether you wear a mask, whether you socially distance, how many crowds, how big a crowd you'll allow yourself to go in, whether you actually self-isolate when you think you're being exposed, your social behavior feeds back into the epidemic, right? And your social behavior at this point can be manipulated and is definitely being influenced by social media. And that social media is driven by the technology that people like me develop, right? And so I'm really interested in, I'm excited by the fact that everyone's sitting up now and spending a lot more time thinking about the consequences of the technology and the impact it has, and trying to understand from the beginning whether algorithms have bias, whether data has bias in it. I mean, this whole awakening to the social responsibility in machine learning, to me, is the most exciting trend.
Absolutely. It can be a lot on Twitter sometimes. I don't know if you're on Twitter, but it's definitely great discussions to be having, and it's coming at a great time.
Better than not having the discussions.
For sure.
And I think what's also super exciting is how much people who are younger than me care. It's not just the old fogies like me who are worried about it. It's almost like I'm being pulled along by people who have so much energy and so much passion for making sure that things are done right. That really also adds to the whole excitement of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No, thank you very much for calling. It was a pleasure to talk to you.